My brother threw out my 11-year-old daughter's entire bedroom, 8 years of memories, because his new girlfriend said it was too childish. He stuffed everything in trash bags without asking, without calling, without even a text. At his engagement party, I didn't argue. I stood up with my phone and showed everyone the before and after photos. I said, "You should know what was in those bags, including?" And he asked to leave his own party. Some people in my family still think I went too far. My mother hasn't spoken to me in 3 weeks. My aunt sent me a message calling me vindictive. But not one person, not one, has told me I was wrong about what happened to my daughter's room. There is a difference, and I want you to sit with that difference while I tell you the whole story. My name is Nora Scott. I am 38 years old. I have a daughter named Lily, who is the most important person in my life. And I have a brother named Damon, who is 34, and has spent most of those 34 years operating on the assumption that the world will rearrange itself around whatever he needs at any given moment. That assumption worked for him for a very long time. It stopped working on a Saturday evening in March, in the backyard of my parents' house, in front of 43 people who had come to celebrate his engagement. But we are not there yet. Let me tell you how we got here. To understand this moment, you have to understand the house on Callaway Street. My parents bought it in the late 1980s, raised 2 kids in it, and turned the spare bedroom into what my mother called a guest room, but what everyone in the family understood was Damon's room. Even after he moved out at 22, even after he moved in with a woman named Cora for 2 years, and then moved out of that too, even after he cycled through 3 apartments across 2 cities, that room stayed his. His old track trophies on the shelf, his college pennant on the wall. His personality imprinted on every surface. Nobody touched it. Nobody suggested he clean it out. It was just understood. My room, the one I had grown up in, became a proper guest room the month I left for college. I came home for Thanksgiving that year and found a beige duvet and a small wicker basket of folded hand towels where my posters used to be. My mother explained, very kindly, that she'd needed the space. I was 20 at the time and told myself it didn't matter. It mattered. I built my career in commercial insurance, not the most glamorous industry, but a stable one, and one where, if you are good and you are patient, the money becomes real. I spent my 20s working for a regional brokerage in Cincinnati, learned everything I could, and by the time I was 31, I had moved back to our hometown to open my own practice. Small at first. Just me and a part-time assistant named Felicia, who is still with me now and is worth more than I could ever pay her. I rented office space above a dry cleaner on West Elm and started calling every contact I had built over a decade. My family's read on this was that I had made a lateral move. My mother told me, with great sincerity, that going independent was a risk I should have thought through more carefully. My father asked whether I had considered just staying with the brokerage where at least I had a salary. Damon, who was working at the time as a sales manager for a mid-sized distribution company, told me he admired the guts, but that most small businesses failed in the first 2 years. He said this the way people say things they want you to believe are encouragement. What none of them knew was that I had spent 6 months before making that move quietly building a client portfolio on my own time. Nothing unethical, these were contacts I had cultivated through my own networking, people who had told me outright they would follow me if I went independent. By the time I signed my lease on West Elm, I already had contracts lined up that would cover my overhead for 14 months. I didn't tell my family this. I let them worry. I let them give advice. I signed those contracts and smiled and said I appreciated the concern. That first Thanksgiving back in town, my mother sat across from me at the table and said, with genuine gentleness, that if things got tight I should let her know, that she and Dad had a little set aside and they didn't want me to struggle. I thanked her. I did not tell her that I had closed a deal that morning worth more than my father's annual pension. I just thanked her, and I meant it, because the offer was kind even if the assumption behind it wasn't. That is the pattern you need to understand. Not cruelty from my family, not exactly, but a kind of permanent calibration where I was always the one who needed looking after, and Damon was always the one who had things figured out. He bought a house at 30, and my parents talked about it for months like he had done something extraordinary. I had bought a house at 29, and my mother's primary comment was that the neighborhood seemed transitional. I had established a college savings fund for Lily, started it the year she was born, through a financial advisor named Robert Chen at a firm downtown, and by the time she was 11, it had grown to something substantial, something that made me feel genuinely safe about her future. And when I mentioned it once at a family dinner, my father said that was smart, but that I should make sure I was also saving for myself. As though the two were mutually exclusive. As though I hadn't thought about both. Lily was the one piece of my life that my family related to without complication. They loved her fiercely and without condition, which I am grateful for. She had spent parts of her summers at my parents' house since she was 3, and somewhere around the time she turned 4, my mother had set up a corner of the spare room, Damon's old room, the one that had never been touched, with a small daybed and a dresser and some hooks on the wall for Lily's things. Over the years, that corner had expanded. A bookshelf, a little desk, drawings she had made framed on the wall beside Damon's pennant, a bin of art supplies. Stuffed animals arranged on the daybed with the particular logic that only an 8-year-old can explain and only a 9-year-old can remember. By the time Lily was 11, that room held 8 years of her relationship with my parents. Every time she stayed over, she added something. A new drawing, a book she had finished and wanted to leave so she could reread it next time. A friendship bracelet she had made at camp. Little fossils from a creek she and my father had walked along. It was not a decorator's room. It was a child's room in the truest sense, which means it was full of everything that mattered to a specific child at specific moments in her specific life. I want you to have that image very clearly, because what happened to it matters more than anything else I am about to tell you. Damon met Brianna Yates at a work conference in October of the previous year. By January, he was calling her his girlfriend in the way that people call someone their girlfriend when they mean something more serious than that word usually implies. By February, he had asked her to move into his house. By March, 8 months after they met, he had proposed. Fast, yes, but Damon has always moved fast. He decided things and then arranged the world around the decision, and he was accustomed to the world cooperating. Brianna was 30 years old, worked in interior design, and had opinions about spaces the way some people have opinions about politics, with complete certainty and very little tolerance for disagreement. I do not say this to be unkind. I say it because it is relevant. She walked through my parents' house in February, the month before they got engaged, and I was there for that visit, and I watched her move through the rooms with the particular energy of someone mentally noting what would need to change. She was pleasant to me, complimented my earrings, asked about my work with polite interest. But her eyes kept moving, cataloging, assessing. She spent a long time in Damon's old room. Lily was not there that weekend. I watched Brianna look at the daybed, at the drawings on the wall, at the bin of art supplies, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not disgust, more like the face someone makes when they open a closet and find it organized in a system that makes no sense to them. Later that evening, I heard her tell Damon that the room had a lot of competing visual energy. I did not know then what that phrase was going to cost my daughter. The engagement party was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday in March. In the weeks between Brianna's visit and the party, I noticed my mother seemed slightly distracted when we talked on the phone, the way she gets when she is holding something she has not decided whether to tell me. I asked her once if everything was fine, and she said yes, of course. She was just busy with the party planning. I believed her. I should have pressed harder. The week before the party, I had a meeting with my attorney, a woman named Jillian Ackafer who handles family law and estate planning and who has been my attorney for 4 years. We were meeting to review some updates to my estate documents, nothing dramatic, just the kind of maintenance you do when a child is growing up and circumstances shift. At the end of the meeting, almost as an aside, Jillian mentioned that I should make sure I had clear documentation of any property or belongings that Lily had at third-party locations, meaning at my parents' house, if those items had sentimental or financial value. It was a general piece of advice, the kind she gives routinely. I filed it away as theoretical and went home. That was a Tuesday. The party was Saturday. On Thursday evening, Lily called me from my parents' house, where she had been staying for the week because school was on spring break and my parents had invited her. She was staying in her room, as she always did, or she had been. She called me at 6:47 in the evening. I know the time because I looked at my phone when it rang and registered it the way you register small details right before everything changes. Her voice was very flat in the way that Lily's voice gets when she is trying not to cry in front of someone. She said, "Mom, my room is different." I asked her what she meant. She said, "All my stuff is gone. The drawings and the animals and the art box and everything. It's all just gone. Grandma said Uncle Damon needed the room. I asked to speak to my mother. My mother took the phone and told me, with the careful voice of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation, that Damon and Brianna had asked whether the spare room could be made available as a proper guest room for when Brianna's family visited, and that it had seemed like a reasonable request, and that she had helped Damon clear it out earlier that week while Lily was at a friend's house for the day, and that she was sorry she hadn't mentioned it sooner, and that they had kept everything. It was in trash bags in the garage, and Lily could have it all back. I asked whether she had called me before doing this. She said she had not wanted to make a big deal of it. I asked whether she had asked Lily. Silence. I said I was coming to get Lily. My mother said I was overreacting, that it was just a room, that Lily had been upset for a few minutes but was fine now, that it would all be fine by the party on Saturday, and please, Nora, do not make this into something it does not have to be. I drove to my parents' house. It took me 22 minutes. Lily was sitting on the couch in the living room with the particular stillness of a child who has cried until there is nothing left, holding a stuffed bear named Gerald that she had apparently retrieved herself from one of the trash bags in the garage. The rest of the bags were still out there. I counted them through the garage window. 8 bags, 8 years. I went through every one of those bags that night after Lily was asleep. Not to sort them, I would do that later, but because I needed to see what had been thrown away as though it were nothing. The drawings she had made at 6 and 7 and 8, some of them matted in actual frames that I had paid for. The little desk organizer, shaped like a cat that she had picked out with her own birthday money. A journal she had started the previous summer and apparently left at my parents' house by accident, with entries in it that I did not read but that existed and mattered. A ceramic dish she had made at a pottery class and given to my mother as a gift, which my mother had kept on the dresser in Lily's room for 2 years, and which was now in a trash bag in a garage. I took photographs of everything. Every bag, opened and displayed. Every item. I did it methodically, the way Jillian had suggested I document things, though I had thought at the time she meant something else entirely. Then I went home and called Jillian's after-hours line and left a message that said I needed to speak with her in the morning. She called me at 8:15 Friday morning. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked how many items had belonged to Lily as opposed to items that had been gifts to my parents that Lily simply used. I told her that most of what was in those bags had been brought to the house by Lily over the years, bought with her money or mine, or received as gifts. Jillian said that was important. She said she was going to make a note of it. She asked me one more question. Was I planning to attend the engagement party the following day? I told her I was thinking about it. She said, with the particular precision that I have come to love about her, that attending or not attending was entirely my choice, but that if I did attend, I should be aware that I would be in a room with everyone who had allowed this to happen, and that I should decide in advance what I wanted that room to know. I thought about it for a long time after I hung up. I thought about Lily's face on the phone. I thought about the trash bags. I thought about the journal I had not read because it was private, and the ceramic dish that had been a gift, and Gerald the bear sitting in a garage in the dark with no explanation a child could make sense of. I thought about the photographs on my phone. And I thought about what I had been building, quietly and carefully, for the past 3 years, not just the business, not just the college fund, but something else. Something I had started after a conversation with Jillian 18 months earlier, when she had raised the subject of family property and legacy, and the ways that things which belong to children can disappear without anyone technically breaking a law. I had taken that conversation seriously. I had followed through on what she suggested. The family had no idea. I decided I was going to the party. I spent Friday afternoon doing 2 things. First, I sat with Lily and we went through the bags together, carefully, and I let her decide what to keep and what was actually okay to leave behind. She kept almost everything. We brought it to my house, and she arranged it in her room here, and when she was done, she sat in the middle of her bedroom floor and looked around at the familiar things and the newly returned things all mixed together, and she said, very quietly, "Mom, why did he do that?" I told her I didn't have a complete answer yet. I told her that what happened was not okay, and that I was going to make sure she knew that clearly and permanently. She looked at me with the particular expression she gets when she is deciding whether to believe something I have said, and then she nodded and went back to arranging her bookshelf. The second thing I did Friday afternoon was organize my phone, the photographs I had taken. A few other items I had saved over the past several months, things I had been keeping because Jillian had told me to keep them. I arranged them in an order that told a story. A clear, simple, undeniable story that required no narration beyond the images themselves. I also texted Damon. I kept it short. I said I would be at the party tomorrow and that I was looking forward to celebrating with him. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. Saturday morning, I got Lily settled at her friend Cassandra's house for the day. Cassandra's mother, Renata, is one of my closest friends and did not ask many questions when I showed up with an overnight bag and a look on my face she apparently recognized, and I drove to my parents' house. The yard had been decorated beautifully. My mother had strung lights between the trees. There were round tables with white tablecloths and small arrangements of flowers that looked like Brianna had selected them, which she probably had. People were arriving in their good clothes, carrying bottles of wine and cards with checks inside. Damon was standing near the back fence looking the way he always looks when things are going according to plan, easy, expansive, ready to be congratulated. Brianna was in a yellow dress, laughing at something one of her friends had said. She had a particular laugh, high and bright, that filled space efficiently. My mother found me near the drink table and held my arm and asked, in a low voice, whether we were going to be all right tonight. I told her we were going to be fine. She looked at me with the searching expression she has used my entire life when she is trying to determine whether I am managing my emotions correctly. I smiled at her. She seemed reassured. I found a seat at one of the tables, accepted a glass of sparkling water, and watched my brother work the crowd. He was good at it. He always had been. Damon could make anyone feel within 90 seconds of meeting him that they were someone he had been hoping to run into. It is a real skill. I have never been able to replicate it, and I spent a long time wishing I could. 43 people. I counted because I needed to know the number. Not as a weapon, as a fact. If I was going to say something, I wanted to know how many people I was saying it to. 43 people, most of whom had known my family for years, many of whom had known Lily since she was born, and none of whom knew what was in those 8 trash bags. The first toast came around 7 in the evening. Damon's friend from college, a man named Terrence Bale, stood up and said warm things about Damon being the kind of man who knew a good thing when he saw it, and everyone laughed at the right moments. And Brianna looked at Damon the way people look at each other when they are very new and very certain. I waited. My father stood up next. He talked about watching Damon grow up, about being proud of the man he had become, about welcoming Brianna to the family. His voice caught once, the way it always does when he is moved, and several people smiled. I love my father. I want to be clear about that. He had not known the full extent of what had happened to Lily's things. My mother had managed that situation herself, and I believe genuinely that my father thought it had been handled with more care than it was. That did not make everything fine, but it matters when I tell this story. There was a pause after my father sat down. The natural pause in which people look around to see who else might speak. I had been waiting for exactly this pause. I stood up. I had my phone in my hand. The screen was on. I said, I also want to say something if that's okay. Damon looked at me. He smiled because there was no reason yet not to. Brianna looked at me with polite attention. My mother's hand moved slightly on the table, the way it does when she is uncertain, but has decided not to intervene yet. I said, most of you know my daughter Lily. She's 11. And she's been coming to Mom and Dad's house since she was 3 years old. She had a room there. Not officially her room, it was the spare room, but it had her things in it. 8 years of things. Drawings she made when she was little. Books. A journal. A ceramic dish she made her grandmother as a gift. The yard was quieter now. Not silent, there was still the sound of the neighborhood. A car passing somewhere, a bird, but the particular quiet of people who have stopped their side conversations to listen. Kept my voice even. This was not difficult. I had been practicing even for a long time. This past week, I continued, while Lily was at my parents' house on spring break, someone cleared out that room. Everything went into trash bags, 8 bags, they went into the garage. I held up my phone. I took pictures. I turned my phone so the screen faced the tables nearest me, and I began moving slowly so more people could see. The photographs were clear. The bags opened, contents visible. The drawings, the journal, Gerald the bear with his worn ear and the small red bow Lily had tied around his neck 2 Christmases ago. I want you to know what was in those bags, I said, because in a few minutes I'm going to tell you something else that was decided about my daughter this week, without asking me, without asking her. And I want you to have the full picture. Damon had stopped smiling. He was very still in the way that people go still when they are calculating rapidly. Brianna's chin had come up slightly. Her hand found Damon's arm. My mother said my name. Not loudly. Quietly, the way you say someone's name when you are hoping they will hear a warning in it. I looked at her for one moment. Then I looked back at the 43 people sitting in the garden where I had grown up. In the light of the string lights my mother had hung between trees, she and my father had planted 30 years ago, and I said, "You should know what was in those bags, including a journal my daughter had been writing in all summer, and a gift she made by hand for her grandmother, and every drawing she left in that room because she thought it would be safe there." I paused. "And you should know that no one asked Lily if this was okay. No one called me. No one said, 'This is what we're doing, is there anything here that matters?' They just decided, and then they invited us to a party." The yard was very quiet now. Damon pushed his chair back. He stood up slowly, and I could see him assembling something, an expression, a response, a way to manage this that would redirect the room's attention. He was good at redirecting rooms. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from childhood, the one he used when I had done something that inconvenienced him significantly, and he was deciding how to make it my fault. He said, "Nora, this is not the place." "I know," I said. "That's why I brought the pictures." Someone at the far table, I think it was my father's colleague Raymond, who has known our family for 25 years, leaned toward the person beside him and said something in a low voice. The woman next to him, whose name I do not know, set her glass down very carefully. Damon looked at Brianna. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that I was not meant to understand, but that I understood completely. Then Damon looked at my mother. And my mother, to her credit and to the credit of whatever she was feeling in that moment, did not rescue him. She looked at the tablecloth. "I think," Damon said, and his voice had changed, the easiness gone out of it entirely, "I think maybe you and I should talk privately." "We can do that," I said, "right after I finish." He pulled his phone out, put it back, pulled it out again. I said, "I'm not here to ruin your party. I'm here because 43 people in this yard love my daughter, and I think they deserve to know what happened to her things. And I think you deserve to know that I know everything that happened, and everything that was decided, and everything that was said about why." Brianna said something to Damon, very quietly. Her face was composed in the way that people's faces are composed when they are working hard to keep them that way. I waited. Damon said, his voice lower now, strained at the edges, "I'm going to need you to stop." I looked at him. "I know you are." He looked around the yard at 43 people who were no longer eating, no longer talking among themselves, no longer performing the social function of a party. They were watching. Raymond had his arms crossed. My father's expression was one I had never seen before, not angry, not surprised exactly, but something quieter and more complicated, like a man who has just understood something he had been avoiding. Damon said, "I think you should leave." I said, "This is my parents' house." He said it again, differently, "I'm asking you to leave." My mother said his name. He turned to her. "Mom," she said, gently, with the particular steadiness that she reserves for moments when she has made a decision she is not entirely comfortable with but is committed to. "Damon, let her finish." The silence that followed that sentence was the longest one of the evening. Damon sat back down, slowly. Brianna kept her hand on his arm. Her jaw worked slightly, just once. Then she was still. I had 3 more things to say. I said them. I said them clearly and without embellishment, and when I was done I sat down, and the party did not exactly resume, but it did not collapse either. It transformed into something different, the kind of gathering where the official occasion has been overtaken by something true, and everyone is recalibrating. What I had not yet told anyone in that yard, not my mother, not Damon, not the 43 people at those tables, was what Jillian Ackhafer had helped me put in place 18 months earlier. What I had been building quietly, carefully, with the particular patience of someone who has watched things she loves get dismissed one too many times. The documents were already filed. The protections were already in place. Everything I needed was already done. And I had not told Damon yet what those documents said about his name, about the house on Calloway Street, and about exactly how much authority he had, or did not have, over anything that happened inside it. That conversation was coming. but it was not coming at the party. It was coming Monday morning at 9 o'clock in Jillian's office, where there would be no string lights and no sparkling water and no audience of 43 people to perform for. For now, I watched my brother sit in a yard full of people who were seeing him differently than they had 40 minutes ago, and I thought about Lily arranging her bookshelf in my house, and I thought about Gerald the bear with the red bow, and I thought about 8 bags in a garage that someone had packed without a single phone call. Everything I had built was about to be tested in ways Damon did not yet understand. And the timing, I had thought, when I scheduled that Monday meeting, that it might be poorly timed, too close to the party, too much at once. Standing in that yard, watching my brother look at his phone and then put it away and then look at it again, I understood that the timing was not poor at all. The Monday meeting with Jillian was at 9 o'clock. I was there at 8:45, sitting in the small waiting area with a coffee I was not drinking, watching the second hand on the wall clock move with the particular slowness that clocks achieve when you are waiting for something that cannot be undone. Jillian came out at exactly 9 and shook my hand and did not ask how I was, because she already knew the relevant parts. She gestured toward her office, and I followed her in and sat across from her desk, and she opened a file folder and placed it between us and said, without preamble, "Everything is in order. You want to walk through it?" I said I did. What Jillian had helped me put in place, beginning in October of the year before last, was not complicated. It was, in fact, rather elegant in its simplicity. My parents' house on Callaway Street had been purchased in the late 80s, and over the 30-plus years they had owned it, the mortgage had been paid off and the property had appreciated considerably. When my father had his first cardiac episode 4 years ago, minor, recovered well, but a wake-up call for everyone, my parents had sat down with Jillian, at my suggestion, to get their estate documents in order. I had paid for that consultation as a gift. My parents had been grateful. Damon had barely registered it. What came out of that process, after several months of careful drafting and 2 separate rounds of revisions, was a revised property agreement that my parents had both signed, witnessed, and filed with the county. The agreement formalized something my parents had always intended but never documented: that their home, should they choose to downsize or pass away, would remain available as a family gathering place in the interim period, and that both of their children had equal standing in decisions affecting the property's use and its contents, including the contents of any room, including the contents of what had been, for 8 years, Lily's room. This was not a dramatic legal weapon. It was not a lawsuit or a filing that would drag anyone into court. What it meant, practically, was that Damon had cleared out property in a home where he had no unilateral authority to do so, where I had standing, and where the documentation existed to establish that my daughter's belongings, brought there over years with my knowledge and my parents' explicit invitation, could not be disposed of without my consent. Jillian had written a letter, 3 paragraphs. It named the agreement, described what had occurred, described what Damon had done, and outlined what was required. A full accounting of every item removed from that room, the return of any item that could be returned, and a formal acknowledgement in writing that this would not happen again. It was not the letter that mattered most. What mattered most was the second document in that folder. I am going to explain this carefully, because it is the part that Damon did not know was coming, and the part that, when he finally understood it, changed the shape of everything that came after. When my parents had updated their estate documents 4 years ago, they had also made a decision about their property that they had not announced to either of their children. They had added a clause, at Jillian's suggestion, that created a right of first offer. If they ever chose to sell the house, they were required to offer it first to their children at a mutually agreed-upon price before listing it on the open market. Standard estate planning. Nothing unusual about it. My parents had mentioned it to me in passing the following year, not as anything significant, just as part of explaining that they had gotten everything organized. I had filed the information away. What my parents had not done, because Jillian had advised them not to, and because I had not asked them to, was tell Damon about the specific terms. He knew there was a right of first offer. He did not know that the clause had been structured to require agreement from both children if they wished to purchase together, but to allow either child individually to exercise the right independently. In practical terms, this meant that if my parents ever decided to sell, I could purchase the house before Damon had any opportunity to, simply by being the first to exercise the right. And it meant that any physical modifications to the property, including the permanent removal of items belonging to one family member's child, constituted a material change that the co-standing party had the right to formally object to. I had formally objected, in writing, the previous Friday. Jillian had filed it with the county that same afternoon. I want to be precise about what I was not doing. I was not trying to take my parents' house. I was not trying to force a sale or create a legal proceeding that would disrupt my parents' lives. My mother was 66 years old and my father was 68, and they had lived in that house for 30 years, and they were going to keep living in it for as long as they wanted. That was not what this was about. What this was about was a brother who had walked into a room that was not entirely his to alter, packed up his 11-year-old niece's belongings into trash bags, and done it because a woman he had known for 8 months thought the room had too much competing visual energy. And I needed him to understand, clearly and with documentation, that the world did not simply rearrange itself around what he needed. Jillian handed me the letter and the formal objection and a third document, which was a summary of the property agreement terms written in plain language, and she said, "I'll send copies to his address today. You'll deliver the originals?" I said I would. She looked at me for a moment with the particular expression she uses when she is about to say something she considers important. "Nora, this accomplishes what you need it to accomplish. It puts it on record. It requires a response. But I want you to be clear about what you want the outcome to look like. I want him to understand that there are consequences. There will be," she paused. "And the party," I had told her briefly about Saturday evening. She had listened without visible reaction, which is one of her most useful qualities. "The party was personal. This is formal. They're separate." She nodded once. "Good, keep them separate." I left her office at 10:15 in the morning and sat in my car for 4 minutes before starting it. The folder was on the passenger seat. The day was clear and cold, the kind of March morning that feels like it is still deciding what season it belongs to. I called Felicia at my office and told her I would be in by noon. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was careful in the way it had been the previous night, when the party had dissolved slowly into small groups of people making their way toward the gate with expressions that ranged from thoughtful to actively uncomfortable. She and I had not spoken directly before I left. I had said goodbye to my father, who had held my hand for a moment longer than usual without saying anything, and I had driven home. "I need to come by," I said. "This afternoon, if that works." A pause. "Is this about Saturday?" "It's about the room and some documents I need to leave with you and Dad." Another pause longer. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into a register I recognized, not defensive, but braced. "Damon called this morning." "I know. He's very upset, Nora." I looked through my windshield at the parking lot outside Jillian's building, at the ordinary morning in progress, people walking to their cars, a delivery van idling near the entrance. "I understand he is." "This afternoon, Mom, around 3? She said yes. I drove to my office and worked through the morning with the particular clarity that comes after a decision has been made and cannot be unmade. Felicia brought me coffee at 11:30 and looked at me with the focused attention she uses when she is determining whether to ask a question. She decided not to. I was grateful. At 2:45, I left the office and drove to Callaway Street. My mother opened the door before I reached it, which meant she had been watching for me. She was wearing the blue cardigan she wears when she is at home and not expecting anyone, which told me she had not expected this to feel like a formal occasion. It did anyway. She stood back and let me in, and I saw my father sitting at the kitchen table with his hands around a mug of coffee, and I saw, with a particular compression in my chest that I had not anticipated, that Damon was sitting across from him. He had called ahead. Of course he had. He was in the same clothes he had been wearing Saturday evening, which meant either he had not gone home or he had come back specifically dressed to look as though nothing significant had occurred. His arms were crossed on the table, and he was looking at me with an expression I recognized, the one that preceded a managed conversation, one where he had already decided the narrative and was prepared to run it. Brianna was not there. I noted the absence and did not comment on it. My mother said, "I'll make tea." Nobody asked for tea. I set the folder on the table. I sat down. My father looked at the folder and then at me, and something in his face shifted, not alarm exactly, but the recognition of someone who has seen official paperwork arrive on kitchen tables before and knows it does not come without consequence. Damon looked at the folder. What is that? Documents from my attorney. His arms tightened slightly. You got an attorney involved. I have had an attorney involved in my family planning for 4 years, Damon. You were just never relevant to it before. My mother, at the counter, made a small sound that was not quite a word. He unfolded his arms and leaned forward. Nora, what happened with the room? I understand you're upset about it. I get it. But it was Mom and Dad's decision, and it was their house, and if you have a problem with how things were handled, that's a conversation to have with them, not— He gestured at the folder, not this. I opened the folder. I placed the summary document in front of him, oriented so he could review it without turning it around. His eyes moved to the page. I watched the movement stop partway through the first paragraph. What is this? My father set his mug down. It's the property agreement. From when we redid the estate documents. Damon looked at our father. What property agreement? My father said, with the measured tone of a man who has had this conversation before, perhaps with himself, perhaps with my mother, perhaps in the 4 years since he had signed those documents. When we got everything organized, Jillian suggested we formalize how the house would be handled. We did that. It gives both you and Nora standing in decisions about the property. Both of us. Damon looked back at the page. Both of us? Yes. The pause that followed was very specific in its quality. Not silence, we could all hear the refrigerator, the neighbor's dog somewhere down the block, but the quality of a person recalibrating every assumption they have made about a situation. Damon looked at me. You knew about this. I was there when Mom and Dad first talked to Jillian. Yes. And you never mentioned it. You never asked. His hand moved to the back of his neck. I have watched him do this since we were teenagers, whenever he is recalculating and does not want his face to show it. So what does this mean, practically? What are you actually trying to do here? I placed the second document in front of him. The formal objection. This is a formal objection to the removal of my daughter's property from this home. It's been filed with the county. It requires you to provide a written accounting of every item removed from that room, and it requires the return of any item that can be returned, along with a written acknowledgement that this will not happen again without my consent. My mother came to the table. She did not sit down. She stood at the end of it with her hands folded in front of her, and she looked at the document with the expression of someone who is working very hard to understand something they had hoped would be simpler. The items are in the garage, she said. We told you that on Thursday. Lily took most of them home. I know. Lily has her things. That is not the point. I kept my voice level. The point is that my daughter's belongings were packed into trash bags in a house where I have standing, without a phone call, because someone decided the room needed to look different. And I want that on record. I want it documented. I want there to be a piece of paper somewhere that says, this happened, it was not acceptable, and it cannot happen again. Damon pushed the document slightly away from him. Not aggressively, more the gesture of someone who is not prepared to touch something yet. You're making this into a legal matter over a room, Nora. My father spoke before I could. His voice was quiet in the way it gets when he is choosing his words with care. She's making it into a legal matter because she was not consulted. Damon. He looked at his son with the particular expression of a parent who loves someone and is disappointed by them at the same time, which is among the most complicated expressions a human face can produce. You should have called her. Damon looked at our father. Something moved through his face that I had not expected, not anger, but a flash of something younger. Something that looked, for just a moment, like the expression of a person who knows he was wrong and is not yet ready to say so. Brianna wanted. I know what Brianna wanted. My father picked up his mug again. You should have called your sister. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Damon looked back at me. The managed quality had partially dissolved from his expression. What was underneath was not entirely unfamiliar. It was the face my brother makes when the situation has moved past his ability to redirect it, when the narrative has been decided without him. He looked tired, I realized. He had probably not slept well. He had probably spent the weekend fielding calls from relatives who had been at the party, navigating Brianna's feelings about what I had done, constructing and reconstructing explanations that held together less and less the more he examined them. What do you want from me? His voice was different now, not confrontational. Genuinely asking, I said, sign the acknowledgement. Return anything of Lily's that was left behind. I think there were a few books and one of her framed drawings still in the bags I didn't take. And make sure that Brianna understands that whatever changes she wants to make to this house go through Mom, Dad, and me, not just Mom and Dad. He was quiet for a long moment. His thumb moved across the edge of the document, not reviewing it, just touching it. His tell. He does it with any piece of paper that requires a decision. And if I sign this, he said carefully, this goes away. The filing, the formal objection. The objection is already filed. It stays on record. That's not negotiable. But it doesn't become anything else, no court involvement, no further action, as long as the terms are met. He looked at our father again. Our father looked at the table. My mother said, quietly, Damon. He signed the acknowledgement. He used the pen I had brought, which was in the front pocket of the folder, which I had put there that morning, when I knew that this was how the meeting was going to go. He signed it and slid it across the table toward me and leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man who has just agreed to something he is still processing. I picked up the signed document and placed it back in the folder and closed it. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then my father said, "Is there anything in the bags that needs to come in from the garage?" I said there were 2 books and a drawing. He got up without another word and went through the back door to retrieve them. Damon watched him go. Then he looked at me, and for one moment, just one, the managed surface was entirely absent from his face, and what I saw there was not resentment, not calculation, but a kind of genuine bewilderment. The look of someone who had done something thoughtless and had been forced to see it clearly. I didn't think it was that important to her, he said, not defending himself, just saying it. She left it there because she thought it was safe, I said. That's why it was important. He nodded once. Not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement. There is a difference, and in that moment the difference was enough. My father came back inside with the 2 books and the framed drawing. He set them on the table in front of me with the careful precision of someone making a small correction. The drawing was one Lily had made when she was 7, a picture of our family at the beach, rendered in crayon with the cheerful inaccuracy of childhood art, every person approximately the same height and smiling with enormous mouths. My father's finger rested on it for just a moment before he stepped back. I picked up the folder and the drawing and the 2 books, and I stood up, and I said goodbye to my parents. My mother walked me to the door. At the threshold, she put her hand on my arm and looked at me with the complicated love of a woman who has 2 children and knows she has failed to be entirely fair to both of them, and said, "I should have called you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She nodded. We were not repaired in that moment. That would take longer and more conversations than one, but we were not broken either. Some things can hold their shape even when they have been stressed. I have come to believe that is true of certain relationships if the people in them are willing to do the maintenance. I drove home. Lily was at school. I put the drawing and the books on the kitchen table where she would see them when she walked in, and I called Felicia and told her I was available for calls if anything urgent had come up. And then I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at my kitchen table and felt the particular stillness of a thing that has been finished. I had not done any of this for drama. I want to be clear about that because I know how the party looked from the outside, me standing up with my phone, photographs of trash bags, 43 people watching. I know how it looked. I had not stood up that evening because I wanted an audience. I had stood up because the people in that yard loved my daughter, and because they were about to celebrate a man who had packed her childhood into garbage bags without making a single phone call, and because I had decided, sometime in the previous 48 hours, that I was done arranging my responses around what would be convenient for everyone else. Jillian had asked me what I wanted the outcome to look like. I had said I wanted Damon to understand there were consequences. That was true. But the fuller truth was something I could not have articulated clearly in her office that morning. It was simpler than a legal outcome and more personal than a document filed with the county. I wanted my daughter to know that her things were not disposable, that they could not simply be bagged up and put in a garage because someone new wanted the space, that there was an adult in her life who would not let that stand without a single word of objection. That was all. It was also, I think, everything. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. Damon and Brianna's engagement continued. They married the following October in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside of town, and I was not invited, which I had expected and accepted. My mother told me about it afterward in a phone call that was carefully neutral in tone, and I said I hoped it had been a beautiful day, and I meant it, because I do not carry grudges the way some people do. They are too heavy and they slow you down. What changed in those months was the texture of things at my parents' house. The spare room was eventually converted into a proper guest room, which was what Brianna had wanted and which was fine. When Lily visited, she stayed in a different room, my old childhood room, the one with the beige duvet, which my mother had quietly filled with a few of Lily's things brought from home, a hook on the door, a small shelf for her books. My mother did not announce this. She just did it. Lily came home from that first visit and told me that Grandma had put up a hook for her backpack. I said that was nice. She said, yeah, she said I could keep stuff there. I said that sounded good. She went back to her homework. Damon and I do not have the relationship we did before, which was already not a particularly close one. We speak at family events. We are civil. At Christmas that first year, he pulled me aside and said something I had not anticipated, that Brianna had gone through the photographs from the party, the ones that had circulated through the family text chain, and had understood for the first time what the room had contained, and that she had said, and these were apparently his words for her words, that she had not realized. I did not have a response prepared for that. I told him I appreciated him saying it. He nodded and went back to the living room. I do not know whether that constituted an apology. I think it was the closest thing to one that was available to either of them at that point. I chose to receive it as such. Robert Chen, my financial advisor, reviewed Lily's college fund the following spring and told me it was performing well and that if the current trajectory held, she would have everything she needed for a 4-year degree and then some, without touching a cent of my own accounts. I thanked him and wrote the information down in the small notebook I keep for things that matter. Lily is doing well. She joined an art program at her school this year, the kind where students work on longer projects over several months, and her most recent piece was a large mixed media panel that her teacher has apparently asked to hang in the school hallway. She told me about it over dinner one night in the way she tells me things she is proud of, but does not want to seem like she is making a big deal of, sideways, casually, while also clearly watching for my reaction. I told her I wanted to see it. She said it was kind of embarrassing. I said that meant it was probably very good. She smiled into her pasta. Gerald the bear lives on her bookshelf here, next to the framed drawing my father retrieved from the garage bag and which now hangs in Lily's room in my house, where it has been since the afternoon I brought it home. She has added things to the shelf around him over the past year, new fossils from a creek we walked along last summer, a small ceramic piece she made at a pottery class, a journal she started and this time keeps here, where she knows it will stay. I look at that shelf sometimes when I am passing her room and the door is open. It is not a decorator's shelf. It is a child's shelf, which means it is full of everything that matters to a specific child at specific moments in her specific life. It is safe here. She knows it is safe here. I have been asked, by people who know the full story, whether I regret standing up at that party. Whether it was too much, too public, too permanent. My aunt still believes I owed Damon more privacy for his mistake. My cousin thinks I could have handled it through a quiet conversation and saved everyone the difficulty. Maybe they are right. I have thought about it. I have sat with the question seriously, the way you are supposed to when people who love you raise an objection. And what I come back to, every time, is not the party and not the photographs and not the 43 people in the yard. What I come back to is Lily's voice on the phone. Flat, trying not to cry. My room is different. The way a child's voice sounds when something they trusted has been taken without explanation, and they are trying to make sense of it and cannot. I made a choice about what to do with that. Other people might make a different choice, and I respect that, but I cannot look at that shelf and regret mine. So tell me, did I go too far, or not far enough? I genuinely want to know what you think.